Hey, what is going on, guys? My name is Riley, and today I am back with another coding tutorial. Today we're going to be going over a to-do list app like this. And if you look in the title, it probably says something about doing it the right way, which sounds kind of condescending, and I'll admit it kind of is, but I've seen a lot of these tutorials going over to-do list apps, and the coding practices they use are usually kind of frowned upon in the real world. So today I'm going to be teaching you how to do it the quote-unquote right way. That is a little bit more complicated, but I promise it will be more applicable in different scenarios, and it's just generally the better way to do it. So if you stick with me, you will learn something. Let's jump right into it. So this right here is the app that we'll be creating today. Nothing super fancy. As you can see, we have some items that you can check and uncheck. So yeah, very nice. You can add by clicking right here, and then let's just enter something. I'll just say strawberries so we know to buy it. And when you click this add button, it will pop you back to the previous screen, and we can add, uncheck, all that fun business. Alright, so let's do this. So we're going to open up Xcode and ignore this. This is the old project. So we're just going to go to File, New, Project, and it's just going to be a single view application, and I'm just going to call this To Do App YouTube. Okay, everything looks good. Make sure the language is Swift. We're going to click Next. And you can put this wherever you want to put it. I'm just going to put it right there. Alright, so now we have our application up and running. I'm just going to minimize these for cleanness sake. And we're going to jump into our storyboard. So as you can see right here, everything is blank. And the first item to do is to drag in a table view. And this table view is going to hold all our tasks. So let's just spread these all the way to the bounds, except for right here, because if you remember, this right here is the status bar, so your time will be right here, battery indicator, so on and so forth. Alright, so this is looking pretty good. Now we want to get this a prototype cell so we can manipulate what things look like. So the first thing we're going to do is create a button. Oops, spelled that wrong. Create a button, drag this into our cell. And this button is going to be our checkbox. So when the user clicks on it, it's going to change its image. And so first off, we have to give this an image. So if we open up our assets folder right here, then we can go and drag in some images for our checkbox. And I'm going to be putting this project in the description, so you should be able to have access to all this. And we're just going to make sure these are all on the same line. It never is by default for me. And then I'm just going to delete these empty ones right here. So we have all three there, all three here. The reasoning for all that is another video. Alright, so let's go back to our storyboard and tap our button. So if you go to the attributes inspector over here on the right, and if you don't see the screen, click this, and this will pop up that side view. And we're going to change the background image. So we're going to give it the checkbox outline. Now it looks kind of ugly, so we're going to double tap right here, just press delete and enter to get rid of that text, and we're just going to size this to be a square. So let's just make the width 30 as well, and that's looking pretty good. Maybe put that down to 25 on each, and then let's just drag it to where it's in the middle of our cell. Perfect. Alright, so we have our button down. Now we just need is the name of the task. So for that, we're going to drag in a label. So make sure it's centered, and we're just going to drag this all the way out here in case we have a really long name. Alright, so we're doing pretty good so far. So yeah, now we're going to create the custom class for our cell. So this class is going to hold our label and our checkbox, and it's going to allow us to click on the checkbox and all that fun business. So if we go to File, New, File, and a Cocoa Touch class, right down here we can do a UI Table View Cell, and I'm just going to name this Task Cell. Make sure language is Swift, and we're going to put it right there. That's looking pretty good. Okay, so like I said, this is going to hold our outlets and the action for our cell. So if we go back to our storyboard, first off, we're going to click the cell itself, or you can do it right here. We're going to go to the identity inspector, and we're going to change its class to the one we just created, this task cell. Alright, so now we're going to do this assistant editor. It looks like a little Venn diagram up here, and you can see that we can see both right here. And we want to open up that file that we just created, the task cell. So then we're just going to select each of these. So we have our button selected. And we're going to hold the control button down on our keyboard and click and drag this right here. And I'm just going to name this checkbox outlet. And this outlet will allow us to change the background of this, which will be useful. And then I'm going to click our label and control drag this over here. And I'm going to do task name label. And that will allow us to change the text. And then the next order of business is to once again select this button, control drag, and this time we're going to change this from an outlet to an action. So it's going to perform some kind of action when we tap on it. And I'm just going to name this checkbox action. And that's looking pretty good right there. And we can just close out of this for right now. That is okay. And now we're going to have to get into the more codey aspects of it. So if we click this cell again right here, and we go over to our attributes inspector, we're just going to give this an identifier as task cell, and you'll see why in a little bit. And we're going to click our table view itself, or you can do it right here, and control drag to this. And we're going to set our data source and our delegate. And what that allows us to do is manipulate our table view. Okay, so now I think we have everything hooked up right here that we need. So let's open up our view controller. And I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. I hate seeing a bunch of chunk. It really bothers me. Okay, so now let's create the code to create our table view. So up here, we need to conform this class to our table view so that we can actually edit things and create the functions that we need, so on and so forth. So we're just going to do UI table view delegate and UI table view data source. Alright, that's looking pretty good right there. It's going to throw an error at us because there's certain functions that we need to call now. So first, let's do our number of rows in section. Okay, and this is going to determine how many rows it's going to show on our table view, and then our cell for row at, and this is going to allow us to actually change those rows. However, we don't know how many rows we want right now, and we also don't know what we want to put in those. And this is where I'm going to kind of diverge from where most tutorials on this kind of stuff go, because this is really how you should be doing it for a to-do list. Okay, so we're going to create our own class, and we're just going to say class, and we're going to call this task. So this task cell is going to hold out all of our tasks, and for this there's only two things that we need, and that's a name. So we're going to do var name, and it's just going to be equal to nothing right now. And then we also need a status for whether it's checked or not. So var checked, and we're just going to declare this to be false. Okay? So this is going to hold our task objects, and all we need is a name and whether or not it's checked. And I will be telling you why we need to know if it's checked here in a little bit. So first thing now that we need to do is create an initializer so that we can create new tasks. So we're just going to type convenience and then init, and then whenever we're creating it, we don't need to know whether it's checked already or not, because by default we know it's not going to be checked. So this is already set to false. So when we're creating a new task, all we need is the name. So I'm just going to do name, and it's of type string, and then we can create our initializer. So whenever you're doing initializers in Swift, you always have to do self dot init That's looking pretty good right there. Okay, and then self dot name equals name. So it's going to set the name for our task equal to whatever's passed in here. Or if this is confusing, you can, I don't know, call this name2 and then name2. So this is this, this is this. But I'm just going to keep it like that. Alright, so our class is looking pretty good. So now when we're populating this table view, we're going to be using multiple tasks. So how do we save multiple of the same thing? Arrays. So we're going to declare an array of this task. So I'm just going to call this tasks with an S at the end. And this is going to be of type task, but array. So what we did here is create an empty array of task objects. So now we can append new task objects into this array. And whenever we create a task, it's going to be appended to this array right here. So the number that we want to show in our table view is however many tasks we have in this array. So all we're going to do simply is return tasks.count. Okay, pretty simple. And then this will get just a little bit more complicated, but not so much. So we want a way to edit the cell being this right here, holding our checkbox and the label. So we're going to create a way right here by doing let cell equal tableview.dq reusable cell, and we want with identifier of type string for index path. And this identifier is what we just had. Hold on, I'll show you. That's what we did here, our identifier. So we're just telling it that this is what we want to edit right here. So this is task cell, this is task cell. For index path, this is already created for us as part of this function. We're just going to be passing that in there. So now we just need to typecast this as this right here, this custom cell class that we created. So ask task cell. Okay? And before we get any errors, that one right there, we have to return the cell. Okay, pretty simple so far. So now we can actually edit that cell that we created. So first we just want to set the name. So if you do cell dot, you see we have all these variables that we created within this file. So checkbox outlet, task name, label, all of that is right here. So we want to set the name, and we have to do dot text to be equal to tasks index path dot row dot name. So we want to take the index path dot row elements of our tasks array that we created up here and then get the name from that. So it's going to start at 0 when creating this table view and go through however many we declared right here, and it's going to set the names, this name label, to be equal to the corresponding value in our array. So that's pretty simple. And then when we're creating that, let's also do cell.checkbox outlet. Actually, hold on, before we do that, we're going to check if this current element right here is checked or not. So we're going to do if tasks index path dot row dot checked. So if it's checked, then we want to do the checkbox outlet dot set background image. So if it's checked, we want it to appear checked on our screen. So we're going to set that background image as, let's just type checkbox filled. For UI control state dot normal, it's not super important to mess with the control state. If it's not checked, we want to do else, and then cell.checkbox outlet dot set background for the checkbox outline. So if it's checked, it's going to appear checked. If it's not checked, then it's just going to be the outline. Okay, So let's run this just to make sure everything's working decently. Actually, I'm going to change this to the iPhone 8. Any day now. Alright, so you see we have our table view right here, but there's nothing on it. We haven't created any elements on it yet. So just for testing purposes, we're going to go over to our view.load, and this loads the first time that our view is loaded, so it's going to run this function. And let's just append an item to one array. So we're going to append a task object because that's what we said we're going to do. So for that, we're just going to type task, and then parentheses, and then you can see it auto-completes for us, and we can give it a name, and I'm just going to say test object. And then let's run this once more, and we should have one element showing up. Yep, right here. But we have no way to add a new element, and we also can't check things, which is obviously a problem. So for that, we're going to come back here, and the first thing we want to do is create a add button up here. So for that, we're going to select our view controller by clicking this, go to editor, embed in, and a navigation controller. So as you can see, this creates this top bar right here, which is what we want, because then we can put a bar button item. And let's just place it right there. And the style, not the style, the system item is going to be add. Okay. So now, when we click this button, we want another view controller to pop up with a different screen basically. So let's go down here and type view controller, and let's drag one in. Okay, so to make this view controller appear when we tap this button, we're just going to select the button and control drag right into there and do show. And when we do show, you can see we have a back button in case they get cold feet and decide not to do it. Okay, so on this view controller, all we really need is a text field that will allow us to, type text, and then an add button. So let's go text field, and let's just drag this in, and a button, which will be our add button. And this is definitely not the most pretty application in existence, but it will get the job done. And just so it's a little more obvious, I'm going to change the background to this nice blue color. If you want to know the blue color, it's right there. And then I'm just going to change the text color to white. And then by double clicking, I'll just change this to add. Okay. Let's move that down there. Alright. And this is unnecessary, but I'm going to add a label right here that just says add a task below. Okay, so if we run this, we can see what we got. Okay, so now we have this same thing right here, but now if we click this add button, it takes us to our new controller, which is awesome. So we can already type right here, blah, 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 but clicking the add button does nothing because we have not coded it to do anything yet. So let's do that now. So we're going to need to create a new file for this view controller specifically. So to do that, we can just click this project icon or go to File, New File. And I'm going to do New File, Cocoa Touch class, and this is going to be a UI view controller. And then I'm just going to call this Add Task Controller. Make sure it is Swift. Create. Alright, let's clean that up a bit. Okay, we are looking good. So let's go back to our storyboard, and let's change its class by going to the Identity Inspector and selecting Add Task Controller. So now, just like we did for our custom cells earlier, we can go here and we can go to add task controller and we can create outlets for all these things. So let's create an outlet for this. And what do we want to call this? Task name outlet. And then we don't need an outlet for this button. We're not changing its look or anything, but we do need an action for it. So let's do add action and make sure we select action here. Okay. Now we are looking pretty good, I would say. Alright, next course of action. Let's select this text field right here and change the placeholder text and just say add a task name ... so the user knows. So it'll show in here add a task name just so they know. And let's go over to our add task controller. So when the user clicks on this add button, what are we wanting to do? Well, we're wanting to take the text from this text field and create a new task object and append that to the array that we created, and then that will show up in our table view. So that's what we're going to have to do now. First, just to check, we want to make sure that they actually entered something when they click that add button. So we'll just do if task name outlet dot text does not equal nothing, then do something. And now we can actually get into it. So like I said, we have to take the text from this and create a task object and append that task object to the array that we have in our view controller file. So we're passing data between files. So there's a lot of ways you can do this, but I see a lot of people do things like declaring global variables, and that's kind of looked down upon, and I'm not going to teach you how to do that. Instead, I'm going to teach you something slightly more complicated, but very good to know. And if you do this in a job interview or something, you'll be looking pretty good. And it's called a protocol. So if we do this protocol outside of our class, I'm just going to call this add task. And then we're going to create a function that lets us add that task object to the array from in here. So we're just going to do func, and let's just call it add task. And for this, all we need is a string. So I'm just going to do name string. And if this is confusing you, it will be cleared up in a little bit. So just create this for right now, and I'll show you what we'll do with it in a little bit. So now we need to create a delegate in here. So I'm just going to do var delegate, and this is going to be of type add task, which is the protocol that we just created. I'm going to add a question mark there for optional. Okay, so now what this delegate allows us to do is use the function that we declared right here. So we can do it right here by delegate dot add task, and the name is going to be the task name outlet dot text. So whatever the user types is what it's going to pass in. And I need to add an exclamation mark right there. So now, if we go back to our view controller, we're going to have to conform this view controller to this type that we just created, or the protocol that we just created. So add task. Now it's going to pop up an error telling us that we don't have the function that we created. So if you remember, this func add task with name of string is what we did right here. So now we're going to say what that actually means. What actually happens when you call that function. And I'm going to place this down here. Okay, so now we're going to be passing in a string from add task controller into here. So now it's pretty simple. We can do the same thing we did before, except instead of having this default string right here, we can just do name, this name that we passed in. So now we can append this to the tasks. And the last thing we're going to do is reload our table view, which I forgot. We're going to have to create an outlet for our table view. So open up our view controller and then just select our table view and click and drag table view. Okay, so this will actually allow us to reload it. So we're going to do table view dot reload data. Okay, so let's build and run this real quick. Okay, so we have this default object that we created right here. So if we go over to add, we can type something. Let's just say buy groceries. I can add it, but it doesn't do anything right here. But if we click the back button, it is also not right here. Let's figure out why. Okay, I figured out the problem. So when we go over here and we have our delegate, we need to actually set this equal to our view controller. So it's of type add task, but because our view controller conforms to this add task protocol, we can set this as the delegate, and that will allow this file to edit our view controller. So how do we do that? We have to create a Segue preparation. So if we just type prepare for Segue, then we can do let VC, standing for view controller, equals Segue dot destination as add task controller. So this is just saying whenever we do our segue, meaning whenever we click that plus button and we jump over to that other view, we can change things about the file before we get there. And we're going to do our delegate, and this is going to be equal to self. So now we can actually call this function here, whereas before we couldn't. So if we build and run this, should be working now. Let's click the plus button. Now say buy groceries and click add. Doesn't do anything here, but if we click the back button, you can see it does something here. So if you want to just automatically pop back over to the screen, that's really simple to do. If we go to our add task controller, right here we can do navigation controller and then dot pop view controller, and we're just going to keep this animated. So now build and run, and you can see we add something. Let's just say buy groceries again, and we click add. It takes us back here. Awesome. So the last thing we need to do now is when we click this, it should do something, right? Well, we're going to be doing that in much the same way that we added tasks. So if we go to our task cell right here, we're going to create another protocol. So let's do protocol, and then let's just call it, I don't know, change button. Doesn't matter too much. And then func change button. And what we're going to be doing here is we want to pass in whether the button was just clicked and it was, checked, or if it was unchecked, or true or false. So we're going to do checked, and then this is going to be a type boolean, and we also want to pass in the index of this item, which I'll explain more in a little bit. Okay, so now we have this here, and just like we did before, we're going to come down here and we're going to create a delegate. So for our delegate, and this is going to conform to the change button protocol that we just created. Change button, and yes, that is looking pretty good. So there's also a couple other things that we're going to want to do, which just follow along and I will explain why. in just a little bit. So we're going to do index p, standing for index path. This is going to be as type int, and we're also going to pass in our tasks array. So we're just going to call this tasks, and just like before, it's going to be a type task. Alright, so this is looking pretty good right here, but for right now we're going to come into our view controller, and we're going to pass in those objects that we just created. So cell.delegate equals self, cell.indexp. This is our index path.row that we're getting from this right here. This will return an error right now, don't worry about it. And then our cell.tasks is going to be equal to the tasks that we have right here. Okay, so it's giving us an error because it's not conforming to the protocol that we just created right here, the change button protocol. So we're going to go change button, and then func change button should autofill for us. Okay, so this is really what's going to happen whenever we click on that button. So let's pop back into our task cell, and if you remember, we passed in the tasks array, we passed in the index path that we're currently on for the particular cell, and we can use this right now. So what we want to do is check if tasks index p dot check. This is going to do this. Okay. So if this is checked and we click the button, that means we're unchecking it, which means we're going to want to do delegate dot change button, and we want to set it equal to false for index p. Okay, so if it's checked, we're unchecking it, which means the new value is going to be false. Let's put our exclamation points there. Otherwise, if it's not checked and we tap the button, we want to check it. So I'm just going to copy and paste this, put it right here, and change this to true. Okay, what does this do? Let's go over to our view controller and tell it what it's going to do. So, no. So, we're passing in the values of what the new button is going to hold, basically, and we're passing in the index for that button. So now we can just do tasks index dot checked equals whatever value they were passing in. So just to recap, we're going to check if that current cell's task was checked. If it was, and we tap it, that means we're unchecking it. So we pass in false, and it goes over to our view controller, and it's going to change its value to be false. And then we're going to reload our table view, and if it's false, right in here, it's going to change the background for us to whatever we wanted it to do, which is great. So now let's build and run this and see what we got going on. Okay, so if we click this, we can see that it checks it. If we click it again, it unchecks. We can go over here, we can add something, buy groceries, add, to use, but that's okay. Let's add another one, strawberries, add, can do this all day. So there you go, guys. I know it was a little complicated. If you get a little bit lost, just kind of go through and read it again. If you're still confused on protocols, I can create another video specifically over protocols themselves. Or if it's the classes that are tripping you up, I can also do a video on classes. Just remember that protocols are just a way for us to edit our data in here from here. Otherwise you couldn't. So it's just giving us a way to edit data between our view controllers. and hopefully it wasn't super complex for you. So, there you guys have it. I hope you learned something from this video. If you did, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike. But go down in the comments and tell me how I can improve for my next video, and hopefully I will. So, I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.